The Bhagavad Gita, a soldier's question and the answer that traveled the world. An original audiobook. Two armies face each other on a plain called Kurukshetra in the north of India. Conch shells blare. Each commander sounds his own, and the poem names every one of them the way you'd name ships or swords. And then the greatest archer alive does something strange. Arjuna asks his charioteer to drive out into the open ground between the two armies. He wants to look at who he's about to kill. What he sees, on both sides, is his own family. Grandfathers, teachers, uncles, cousins, brothers-in-law, childhood friends, arranged in battle lines, waiting for him. And his body quits before his courage does. The poem is precise about the symptoms, verse by verse. His limbs give way, his mouth dries up, his skin burns, his whole body trembles, the hair on his arms stands on end, and his bow, the famous bow called Gandiva, slips out of his hand. He sits down in the back of the chariot and says, "I will not fight." His charioteer turns around to answer him. The charioteer is Krishna, his cousin, his closest friend, and as the poem will slowly reveal, God driving the horses. The conversation that follows is 700 verses long, split into 18 short chapters, and it's called the Bhagavad Gita, Sanskrit for the Song of the Lord. It is probably the most read, most translated, most argued about text India has ever produced. Gandhi ran a freedom movement on one reading of it. A revolutionary named Tilak ran a different movement on the opposite reading. Thoreau carried it to Walden Pond. Oppenheimer quoted it at the first atomic bomb test. All of that comes in the final chapter, and all of it grows from this one frozen minute between two armies. So this book does the obvious thing. It walks the conversation itself, in order. What Arjuna asks, and what, layer by layer, he's told. First, back up, because the Gita sits inside a much larger story, and the frieze makes no sense without it. The larger story is the Mahabharata, the longest epic poem in the world, around 100,000 verses, roughly 10 times the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. Its plot, stripped to the bone, is a family inheritance dispute that eats a civilization. Two sets of royal cousins share one bloodline. The 5 Pandava brothers. Arjuna is the third, and their 100 cousins, the Kauravas, led by the eldest, Duryodhana. The throne should pass to the Pandavas. Duryodhana means to keep it. He tries poison, he tries burning down a house with the brothers inside, and finally he tries something legal, a rigged dice game. The eldest Pandava, who cannot refuse a formal challenge, gambles away his kingdom, his brothers, himself, and the brothers' shared wife, Draupadi, who is dragged into the assembly hall by her hair, while her husband sits bound by the rules of the game. The price of losing is 13 years of exile. The Pandavas serve every day of it. When they return and ask for their kingdom back, Duryodhana refuses to give them 5 villages. He refuses, the epic says, to give them land enough to fit on the point of a needle. Every mediation fails. Krishna himself carries the final peace offer, and Duryodhana tries to arrest him at the negotiating table. So, war. 18 armies gather at Kurukshetra, and the Gita occupies 18 chapters of the epic's 6th book, narrated in an odd cinematic frame. A courtier named Sanjaya, granted long-distance divine sight by the poet Vyasa, describes the battlefield live to the blind old king Dhritarashtra, father of the 100 Kauravas, sitting in his palace far away. The whole Gita is technically a broadcast, God talking to a warrior relayed to a blind king who could have stopped the war and didn't. Now Krishna, because who he is, decides what the conversation means. In the epic's foreground, he's a neighboring prince of the Yadava clan, a kinsman of both sides, famous for winning by cleverness rather than force. Before the war, both Duryodhana and Arjuna come to him for help, and Krishna offers a choice that tells you everything about both men. On one side, his entire army. On the other, Krishna himself, alone, unarmed, sworn not to fight, useful only as an advisor. Duryodhana grabs the army and congratulates himself. Arjuna takes the unarmed man and asks him to drive his chariot. In that world, the driver's seat was the humbler seat. So God enters the greatest war of the age, holding reins, not weapons. And the poem is open about the God part. In the 4th chapter, Krishna tells Arjuna plainly, "I have had many births, and so have you. I remember mine, you don't." And then 2 verses that became one of Hinduism's load-bearing ideas. Whenever dharma, right order, duty, justice, decays and its opposite rises, I send myself forth. Age after age, I take birth to protect the good and reset the balance. That's the doctrine of the avatar, the descent of God into the world, stated in the Gita as casually as a man giving his address. It matters for what follows in 2 ways. It means Arjuna's counselor claims to see the whole board, not one player's corner of it. And it means the advice comes with a strange guarantee attached. This isn't a philosopher speculating about death from the outside. If the speaker is telling the truth, he's the only one on the field who's been on both sides of it. Here Arjuna's actual argument though, because it's the part modern readers skip and shouldn't. He isn't afraid, and he isn't wrong in any easy way. His case, laid out across the first chapter, is a moral one. Those men across the field include Bhishma, the grandfather who raised him, and Drona, the teacher who put the bow in his hands and made him the archer he is. What victory is worth killing them? He goes further and gets systematic. War kills the men who uphold a family's traditions. With them dies family dharma. When that dies, he argues, the whole social order unravels, and the ruin lands on everyone, including the women and children the war was supposedly for. Better, he says, to live on alms, a prince begging, than to eat pleasures smeared with the blood of teachers. Better to be killed unarmed and unresisting than to win this. Then he stops arguing altogether, and does the thing the whole Gita hangs on. He admits he's lost. My nature is crushed by pity, he says. My mind is confused about dharma. I genuinely cannot tell what's right. I am your student. Teach me. The tradition took that collapse seriously enough to name the first chapter after it. Arjuna Vishada Yoga. The yoga of Arjuna's despair. Not the failure before the path. The first step of the path. The text's own structure makes the claim. The honest admission that you don't know what to do is where the teaching becomes possible at all. Krishna, notably, doesn't soften anything. The next chapter opens with him asking roughly, "Where has this weakness come from, at the worst possible hour? It's unworthy of you. Stand up," and then he does something no one on that battlefield expects. Before we follow him, 30 seconds of housekeeping, because the object itself is worth knowing. The Bhagavad Gita is 700 Sanskrit verses, 701 in some manuscript lines, in 18 chapters. Each chapter, traditionally titled as a yoga, the yoga of despair, of knowledge, of action, of meditation, and so on. Yoga here doesn't mean postures. It means a discipline, a method of yoking yourself to something. Scholars date its composition somewhere in the centuries around the year 0. Estimates run from roughly 200 BCE to 200 CE, and the honest answer is, nobody knows precisely. It may have grown in layers. What's clearer is what it's made of. The Gita is a deliberate synthesis, a braid of 3 older strands. From the Upanishads, the forest philosophy texts, it takes the deathless self. Some of its verses about the soul are near quotations of the older Katha Upanishad. From the Samkhya school, it takes a cool analysis of matter and mind. From the growing devotional movements, it takes a personal God you can love. 3 traditions that often pulled against each other, braided into one answer to one urgent, practical question. And it's worth stating that question precisely, because everything that follows in this book answers it. Arjuna's problem is not whether war in general is bad. It's this: every option in front of me looks wrong. Fighting is monstrous, walking away betrays my brothers and rewards injustice. When every road is stained, why act at all? And if I must act, how do I act without being destroyed by what the action costs? Krishna's opening move, as the second chapter begins, is to ignore the war completely, and ask what exactly Arjuna thinks is standing on that battlefield in the first place. What is a person? One more beat of chapter 1 deserves its own telling before the teaching starts, because the Gita's audience never forgets it, the sheer sound of the opening. The blind king's first line is the poem's first verse. Dhritarashtra asks Sanjaya, "Gathered at Kurukshetra on the field of Dharma, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu do?" Field of Dharma, Dharmakshetra, is the very first word, and commentators across 12 centuries have pointed at it. Before a single arrow, the poet tells you this ground tests rightness, not just strength. Then the roll call. The old commander Bhishma roars like a lion and blows his conch. Drums, cymbals, kettle drums crash. The sound, the poem says, was tumultuous. And on the other side, Krishna and Arjuna answer with their own conches, each named like characters, Krishna's Panchajanya, Arjuna's Devadatta. The noise, we're told, shook the sky and the earth, and tore at the hearts of the 100 brothers. This is the din, inside which the world's most famous philosophy lesson is about to happen. Not a cave, not a classroom, not a riverbank at dawn. The tradition itself underlines the oddity. A later verse, beloved in India, pictures the Gita as milk. The Upanishads are cows, Krishna the milkman, Arjuna the calf, and the milk is drawn for everyone. The forest wisdom, in other words, delivered where people actually live, mid-crisis, deadline pressing, family watching, no good options. If the teaching works here, it works anywhere. That's the promise this staging makes. And with Arjuna seated in the chariot, bow down, eyes wet, having formally asked to be taught, the armies hold, the poem holds its breath, and Krishna begins with the sentence that has startled first-time readers for 2,000 years. The wise, he says, grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. Chapter 2. Arjuna has asked to be taught. The first lesson is about what a person is, and Krishna opens it with that startling line. The truly wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. Here's the claim underneath it, built out across the Gita's second chapter. What stands on that battlefield in each body is two things, not one. There's the body itself, born, growing, aging, guaranteed to die. And there's the one wearing it, the Atman, the self, the witness behind the eyes. The Gita's verse 22 of chapter 2 carries the image every Indian schoolchild knows. As a person takes off worn-out clothes and puts on new ones, so the embodied self discards worn-out bodies and enters new ones. Death, on this account, is a change of clothes. And Krishna walks the logic in both directions. Verse 13. You've already survived this transition inside one lifetime. The child's body you had is gone, the youth's body is gone. And you didn't grieve those deaths, because the one wearing them continued. Verse 20, which closely echoes the older Katha Upanishad. The Gita is openly borrowing here. The self is never born and never dies. Unborn, eternal, ancient. It is not killed when the body is killed. Then the famous armor of negations, verse 23. Weapons cannot cut it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot wet it, wind cannot dry it. Notice what this does to Arjuna's stated problem. His horror was, I will destroy Bhishma, I will destroy Drona. Krishna's first answer is, you overestimate your weapon. Nothing your arrows can reach is the part of them that matters. You can kill bodies. Bodies were always going to die. The wearer, you can't touch. Whether that reframe comforts you or alarms you, hold the reaction. The poem knows it's a dangerous idea, and will watch it handle the danger. The machinery behind this comes from Samkhya, one of India's oldest philosophical schools, and the Gita compresses it into a working sketch. Worth 30 seconds, because the whole poem runs on it. Samkhya says reality has two ingredients: Prakriti, nature, matter, energy, everything that changes, and Purusha, consciousness, the watcher, that which doesn't. The radical part is where Samkhya draws the line. Your body is Prakriti, obviously. But so are your senses. So is your mind. So are your thoughts, your moods, your memories, your personality. All of it machinery, all of it changing, all of it watchable. The real you on this map is only the watching. Everything you can observe come and go, anger arriving, fear draining away, a thought forming, is by the fact that you observed it, not you. Prakriti itself churns through three strands the Gita returns to constantly, called gunas: sattva, clarity, light, balance; rajas, heat, drive, restlessness; tamas, heaviness, darkness, inertia. Every mood, every meal, every personality, the poem says, is these three in shifting ratios, weather systems moving through the machine. Chapter 3, verse 27, draws the conclusion that startles first-time readers most. All actions, everywhere, are performed by the gunas of Prakriti. The machinery does everything, while the self, confused by ego, thinks, I am the doer. Even your doing, in other words, is weather. The watcher never lifted a finger. It never had fingers. You'll meet this idea again at the poem's terrifying climax in our chapter 4, wearing a very different face. But its first use is surgical. Arjuna's paralysis is made of I. I will kill my teacher. I cannot bear it. What will become of me? Krishna's opening move loosens the grip of that word. Most of what you call I, he's saying, is machinery in motion. Find what's actually yours in there. It's smaller than you think. Krishna is honest enough to argue on more than one floor of the building, and the poem doesn't hide it. Right after the soaring metaphysics, chapter 2, verses 31 to 37, he descends to ground level and speaks to Arjuna the professional. You are a kshatriya, a warrior by birth and training, and this is a righteous war you didn't start. For your class, there's no higher calling than such a fight. Die in it, heaven opens. Win it, you rule the earth. But walk away, and men will tell the story of the great Arjuna who fled. And for a man like you, he says, disgrace is worse than death. Cold, worldly, almost cynical, and deliberately so, the Gita meets its student at every altitude and says as much. These arguments, Krishna announces, were the analytical view. Now hear the view of practice. That view begins with the Gita's working definition of suffering. Verse 14. Contacts between senses and world, heat, cold, pleasure, pain, come and go, impermanent, bear them. The person these contacts cannot shake, verse 15, is fit for immortality. And then the definition that gave the whole tradition its center of gravity. Verse 48, Samatvam yoga uchate. Evenness of mind is called yoga. Not visions, not powers, not even peace exactly. Evenness, the same steadiness in success and failure, honor and insult, gain and loss. Everything else in the poem, the action teaching, the meditation manual, the devotion, is a method aimed at that one quality. Which raises the obvious question, and Arjuna, ever the practical man, asks it almost immediately, in exactly these terms. Fine, but what does such a person actually look like? How do they talk? How do they sit? How do they walk around? Give me the portrait. Krishna's answer runs 18 verses, and the tradition treats them as the poem's first summit. The Portrait, Chapter 2, verses 54 to 72. Mahatma Gandhi said that if all the rest of the Gita were lost, and only these verses survive, they would be enough. The steady one, Krishna begins, has let go of cravings as they arise, and finds contentment in the self alone. Not numbness, the description is of someone unhooked, not switched off, without longing amid pleasures, without dread amid dangers. Met with good or ill, they neither celebrate wildly nor collapse. The image the poem chooses is a tortoise. As a tortoise draws its limbs in at will, the steady one can withdraw the senses from the world's objects. At will being the operative phrase, the limbs come back out. And then mid-portrait, Krishna does something remarkable for a text this old. He stops describing the saint and gives a mechanical, step-by-step account of how an ordinary person falls apart. Verses 62 and 63, the chain. Dwell on an object of the senses, and attachment forms. From attachment, desire. From desire blocked, anger. From anger, delusion. From delusion, memory fails. You forget what you know, what you promised, who you are. From lost memory, discernment collapses. And when discernment goes, the person is destroyed. 6 links, dwelling to destruction, and the chain starts not with an act, but with attention, with where you let the mind graze. Every later meditation tradition in India is in some sense a commentary on those 2 verses. The portrait closes with the poem's most quoted image of peace, the ocean which all rivers enter, and which stands unmoved. Desires flow into the steady one like rivers into the sea, and the sea does not flood. Arjuna has now heard what a person is, and what mastery looks like. And being Arjuna, he immediately finds the contradiction, and opens chapter 3 with an objection sharp enough that the entire rest of the Gita is the answer to it. Here's the objection, and it's a good one. Chapter 3 opens with it. If understanding beats action, Arjuna says, if the self is deathless, if evenness is the goal, if the wise one withdraws like a tortoise, then why are you shoving me into this horror? Why not renounce? Drop the bow for good, walk off the field, take the forest path, be a sage. People had done exactly that for centuries. The renouncer was the most prestigious spiritual figure of the age. Arjuna is essentially asking, isn't the logical end of your own teaching to quit? Krishna's answer closes the trapdoor the whole tradition had left open. No one, he says, verse 5, remains actionless even for a moment. Everyone is driven helplessly to act by the gunas, the strands of nature. Sit motionless in a cave, and your body acts. Heart, breath, digestion, and above all the mind, churning. And he gets pointed about the failure mode. Verse 6. One who restrains the organs of action, but sits there mentally chewing on the objects of the senses, is called a hypocrite. The word in the Sanskrit is blunt, mityachara, a fraud. Fake renunciation is just desire with good posture. Real renunciation, he'll argue for the rest of the poem, was never about leaving action. It's about leaving something inside the action. There is no exit from doing. The machine acts as long as it runs. The only live question, the one that was hiding inside Arjuna's why act at all, from the beginning, is what your relationship to the doing is. And to that, Krishna gives the answer the Bhagavad Gita is famous for. A single verse, 8 words in the original meter span, that Indians quote the way the West quotes to be or not to be. It's the hinge of the entire poem. Chapter 3. There's no exit from acting, Krishna has said. So everything now rides on how. Here is his answer. The most quoted verse in the poem. Chapter 2, verse 47. Karmani evadi karaste, ma phaleshu kadachana. Your right is to the action alone, never to its fruits. Don't act for the sake of the fruits, and don't, therefore, slide into not acting at all. 4 clauses, and the whole teaching in miniature. Read it carefully, because it's misquoted constantly. It does not say don't have goals. Arjuna is being told to fight a war, which is nothing but a goal pursued with total commitment. It does not say results don't matter. The war's result matters enormously, that's why it must be fought. It draws a line of ownership. The action is your jurisdiction. The outcome never was. An outcome is a committee decision. Your effort, other people's choices, timing, weather, luck, 10,000 causes braided together, of which you control exactly one strand. Claiming the fruit means staking your peace on a vote you don't control. The anxiety, the paralysis Arjuna is drowning in, lives precisely in that gap between what you do and what you get. So the instruction is, aim with everything you have, act with everything you have, and drop your claim on the verdict. The Sanskrit shorthand is nishkama karma, action without craving. Verse 48 then attaches the earlier definition to it. Established in yoga, perform actions abandoning attachment, even-minded in success and failure. And 2 verses later, a phrase that turned into a proverb. Yoga karmasu kaushalam. Yoga is skill in action. Not escape from action, skill in it. The claim being that the archer who has stopped gripping the outcome aims better, not worse. The surgeon steadies, the speaker breathes. Whether that's true you can test in any week of your life, which is much of why this verse has traveled so far. Chapter 3 of the Gita then widens the lens. Why should acting, rather than renouncing, be the nobler path in the first place? Krishna gives 3 arguments, escalating. First, the cosmic one, verses 10 to 16. The world itself runs on a wheel of exchange. His era's image is yagna, sacrifice. Rain feeds crops, crops feed creatures, offerings feed the order that returns the rain. Whoever takes from the wheel without turning it, verse 12 says flatly, is a thief. Whoever cooks only for himself, verse 13, eats sin. Strip the ancient ritual furniture, and the argument stands on its own legs. Your life is subsidized every hour by the labor of others. Opting out of contribution isn't purity, it's freeloading. Second, the practical example, and he names a name, Janaka, the philosopher king of the Upanishads, famous as fully liberated, and famous for ruling a kingdom, taxes and lawsuits and all. By action alone, verse 20, Janaka and his kind reached perfection. It can be done from inside a job. Third, and this is the argument aimed straight at Arjuna's station, verse 21. Whatever a great man does, others do. The standard he sets, the world follows. Krishna even applies it to himself, a startling verse. I have nothing to gain in all 3 worlds, nothing unattained, and yet I act ceaselessly, because if I stopped, the worlds would follow my example and collapse. The word the tradition lifted from this passage is loka samgraha, the holding together of the world. Act at minimum, because the social fabric is woven from people acting well when they'd rather not. Every visible shirker unravels it a little, every visible steady hand tightens it. Renunciation, for a man with Arjuna's responsibilities and Arjuna's watching audience, wouldn't read as holiness, it would read as permission. Then comes the verse that has caused more argument than any other, and it needs careful handling. Chapter 3, verse 35. Better one's own dharma, done imperfectly, than another's dharma done well. Better death in one's own dharma, another's dharma brings danger. Svadharma, own duty, own path, own nature. The immediate use is clear enough. Arjuna, mid-crisis, is fantasizing about someone else's life. The renouncers, the beggars. Krishna is telling him the fantasy is a trapdoor. You are a warrior with a warrior's training, a warrior's obligations, and a war in front of you that exists partly because of choices you and your brothers made. The path out runs through your actual situation, not around it. Read that way, it's advice most people recognize the truth of. The grass is greener exit usually isn't an exit. But, and the poem's honesty requires saying this now, not burying it, Svadharma in Krishna's world was tangled with the system of 4 social classes. In a later verse, chapter 4, verse 13, as Krishna say he himself created that 4-fold order, dividing people by guna and karma, by qualities and works. For 2,000 years, readers have fought over those words. Does duty follow your nature, your actual aptitudes and situation, or your birth? Defenders of caste read birth. Reformers, including many revered modern teachers, point to the verse's own wording, qualities and works, nothing about parentage. In the 20th century, Ambedkar, the great Dalit leader who drafted India's constitution and eventually left Hinduism with millions of followers, judged the text too compromised by the birth reading to be rescued. Gandhi, reading the same pages, found the charter of his life. We'll watch that fight play out properly in the final chapter. For now, mark the live edge. Svadharma is either the most grounding idea in the poem or the most dangerous, depending entirely on who defines your duty. Arjuna, still listening, asks the question any honest person asks once they've heard the standard. Then why do people do wrong when they know better? What drags a man into harm, verse 36, as if pushed by force, even against his own will? Krishna's answer, verses 37 onward, is a profile of a single enemy, kama, desire, craving, and its alter ego, krodha, the anger that erupts when craving is blocked. Born of the Rajas strand, he says, the great devourer, the great enemy. Know it by 3 marks. It disguises itself, as smoke covers fire, as dust films a mirror, as the womb wraps an embryo, so craving wraps knowledge. You don't notice wanting becoming needing, becoming justifying. It's insatiable, a fire that grows by feeding, never quenched by what it consumes. The meal makes the hunger. And it's well garrisoned. Its strongholds, verse 40, are the senses, the mind, and the intellect, meaning it can argue. The cleverest reasoning you've ever heard may be craving, wearing your intellect as a uniform. Then Krishna gives the counter-strategy, and it's a map of the person, verse 42. The senses are high, higher than the senses, the mind, higher than the mind, the intellect, and higher than the intellect, the self. Command from the top floor. Anchor in the watcher, let intellect govern mind, mind govern senses, and strike early, he says. Control the senses first, and slay this destroyer of knowledge before it settles in, because every link down the chain from chapter 2, dwelling, attachment, desire, anger, delusion, ruin, is easier to cut near the top. It's the poem's complete psychology of temptation, in a page and a half. Not a devil outside you, but a fire inside, camouflaged, escalating, and smart. Name it early. That's the training. Where the training happens, the actual seat, breath, and daily practice, is exactly where the poem goes next. Put the whole method on one table, because chapters 2 and 3 of the Gita, taken together, form a complete operating manual, and it fits in a breath. Choose your action by dharma, your real situation and station, honestly read, not the fantasy alternative. Perform it with total skill. Yoga is skill in action. Half-heartedness honors nobody. Offer it. Act as contribution to the wheel that feeds you, not as private hoarding. Cook for more than yourself. Release the fruit. The outcome was never your department. Aim true, loose the arrow, and let the verdict be the committee's. And hold evenness, the same face for success and failure, because both were always possible and never fully yours. That's karma yoga, the discipline of action. Of everything in the Gita, this is the piece that traveled farthest, the part quoted in locker rooms and boardrooms and operating theaters by people who have never heard the word Upanishad. When this channel's earlier book on Marcus Aurelius told you the Stoics separated what's up to us from what isn't, you were hearing a Greek cousin of this exact teaching, worked out independently and ocean away. If this book is earning its minutes, by the way, this is the natural place to say it. Subscribe. Just Books publishes one full audiobook like this every week, built from the sources. Now the honest gap in the manual. It's one thing to be told, loose the arrow and drop the claim. It's another to actually feel nothing clutch in your chest as the arrow flies toward a grandfather. Instructions don't install themselves. A mind like wind doesn't calm because a verse told it to. Arjuna knows it, and says so, bluntly, in one of the poem's most human moments. Krishna's response is a training program and a confession. Chapter 4. The method is on the table. Act well, drop the claim. Now for where that steadiness is actually built, because the Gita contains a meditation manual and it's startlingly concrete. Chapter 6. The Yoga of Meditation. The setup, verses 10 to 13. A clean, quiet spot, a firm seat, neither too high nor too low. The text specifies the padding, cloth over deerskin over kusha grass, the era's yoga mat. Body, head, and neck in one straight line, motionless, gaze resting toward the tip of the nose, not wandering. Sit and hold the mind to one point. The prerequisites, verses 16 and 17, are pure common sense, and notice what they rule out. Yoga is not for one who eats too much, nor for one who eats nothing, not for the oversleeper, nor for the one who forces wakefulness. For the person moderate in food, recreation, effort, and sleep, this discipline destroys sorrow. In one verse, the Gita quietly fires the extreme ascetic, the starving, self-torturing holy man who is the spiritual celebrity of its age. The instrument shouldn't be snapped, only tuned. And before any technique, Chapter 6 gives the ground rule of the whole enterprise. Verse 5, one of the poem's most quoted lines, "Lift yourself by yourself, do not let the self sink, for the self alone is the self's friend, and the self alone is the self's enemy." No teacher, no God, no verse does the sitting for you. The same mind that manufactures your misery is the only tool available for ending it. Which sounds inspiring exactly until you try it, until you actually sit, spine straight, gaze steady, and watch your own mind bolt like a spooked horse within 8 seconds. Arjuna, who has evidently tried it, now says exactly that to God's face, and gets the most reassuring answer in the poem. Chapter 6, verse 34. Arjuna's objection, and 25 centuries of meditators have loved him for it. The mind, Krishna, is restless, turbulent, powerful, stubborn. Trying to control it is like trying to control the wind. No false modesty, no spiritual politeness. This is the greatest archer alive, a man whose profession is stillness under pressure, reporting that the inner discipline is harder than his day job. And Krishna's reply, verse 35, is worth memorizing for its structure alone. First, agreed. Without doubt, he says, asamshayam, the mind is restless and hard to hold. No gaslighting, the difficulty is real, certified by God. Then, but it can be done, by two things, abhyasa, practice, regular, repeated, unglamorous return, the same word a musician would use for scales, and vairagya, non-attachment, loosening the grip that gives thoughts their sticking power. Practice and letting go, the entire technology in 2 words. Every meditation tradition since is elaboration. Arjuna pushes once more. The question of the almost. What about the person who has faith and tries, and whose mind still wanders, who dies unfinished? Both worlds lost, like a cloud torn apart. And Krishna's answer, verses 40 to 45, is the safety net under the whole path. No one who does good, dear friend, ever comes to a bad end. No sincere effort is ever lost. The unfinished yogi, he says, is reborn into circumstances where the work resumes. Carry forward, verse 44, by the momentum of former practice, drawn onward, even involuntarily. You cannot fail this course, you can only pause it. Whatever one makes of rebirth, hear what the teaching is doing. It removes the panic from practice. No deadline, no damnation for wandering minds, just return and return and return. The steadiness Arjuna needs is built like a wall, one unremarkable brick of practice at a time, with the mortar of not gripping. Then the poem turns a corner that changes its temperature entirely. Chapters 7 through 12 introduce the third great path, bhakti, devotion. And the god who has been coolly lecturing on metaphysics begins speaking, unmistakably, as someone who wants to be loved. The signature verse is chapter 9:26, and its whole force is in how little it asks. A leaf, a flower, a fruit, water. Whoever offers me these with love, that offering of love I accept. Measure the claim against its world. Religion in Krishna's era could mean elaborate fire sacrifices, priests, fees, Sanskrit formulas, and strict rules about who was even allowed in. This verse prices access to God at a leaf, and moves the entire transaction from the offering to the love. 6 verses later comes the door flung open, chapter 9, verse 32. Even those of lowly birth, women, merchants, laborers, taking refuge in me, they too reach the highest goal. 2 honest things at once about that verse. Its phrasing groups women and workers as lowly, and a modern ear rightly winces, and in its own century, it was radical. It told every person the priestly gatekeepers excluded that the door was never actually shut. Both true, hold both. Chapter 12 then paints who the devotee becomes, and the portrait is striking for what it lacks. No visions, no austerities. Friendly and compassionate to all beings, free of possessiveness and ego, even in pleasure and pain, forgiving, content. The same to friend and enemy, in honor and disgrace. The path of love, in other words, graded by ordinary kindness under pressure. Knowledge for the analytical, action for the busy, meditation for the still, devotion for the loving. The Gita's famous pluralism, 4 doors into one house. And Krishna explicitly blesses the fit of path to temperament. And then Arjuna, devotee, student, friend, asks for the one thing the lectures haven't given him. You've told me what you are, he says. Chapter 11 of the Gita is the vision, and even secondhand, at 18 centuries distance, it retains its voltage. Arjuna asks to see Krishna's true form. Krishna consents, but verse 8, your own eyes cannot bear it. I give you divine sight. What follows, the Vishvarupa, the universal form, is the poem's summit and its terror. The poet reaches for the only comparison big enough, verse 12. If 1,000 suns rose in the sky at once, that might resemble the splendor. Arjuna sees the whole of existence gathered in one body. All gods, all worlds, every being, faces on every side, no beginning, middle, or end. His hair stands on end. He bows, stammering. And then the vision turns. The faces multiply, and some of them are furnaces. Arjuna watches both armies, his enemies, his cousins, his teachers, Bhishma, Drona, the men standing around him on the field at this moment, streaming into blazing mouths, verse 28, like rivers racing to the ocean, like moths hurtling into flame, some caught between teeth, already crushed. The archer who has outstared every battlefield in the world begs to know what he's looking at. Tell me who you are, for I cannot fathom this. And the answer, verse 32, is the most famous line in the poem. Kalos me. I am time, destroyer of worlds, engaged here in ending these armies. Even without you, all these warriors will die. Then the instruction that reframes Arjuna's entire crisis in 9 words. Therefore stand up, win your glory, be merely my instrument. Nimitta matram, the mere occasion. The outcome Arjuna has been agonizing over as his to cause is, in the vision's logic, already accomplished. Time has already eaten the field. His choice was never whether those men die. It was only what he will be while the inevitable moves through him. Arjuna, shaking, apologizes for every casual word, for calling God friend at dinners, and begs to see the human face again. And Krishna gives it back, which is quietly the most important move in the chapter. The universal form was true. It was also unbearable. And the poem knows a truth you cannot live with is not yet a teaching. So God resumes the shape of the friend with the reins, and the temperature of the poem changes one last time, from terror to something close to tenderness. The vision's work, though, is done, and it's worth stating plainly, because it completes the answer to Arjuna's original question. The metaphysics said, what's essential in those men cannot be killed. The action teaching said, the outcome was never yours to own. The vision showed both, at scale. The field already belongs to time. Every general is mortal the moment he's born. Your agonized sense of being the author of their deaths was always an optical illusion of the ego. What remains yours, all that was ever yours, is the quality of the acting, the aim, the skill, the offering, the evenness. And in the final chapter, 18, the poem gathers everything into its last teachings, including the verse the devotional schools call the Charama Shloka, the ultimate verse, 66. Abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone. I will free you from every sin, do not grieve. After 700 verses about duty, abandon even that when it's carried as one more anxious possession. The final release is of the religion itself as a burden. Delivered verse 64 with an unguarded preface, because you are dear to me, I will tell you the highest secret. It's striking how the poem's crescendo isn't cosmic at all. It's personal. You are loved, stop grieving. But its very last move is stranger still. After all this, God does something almost no scripture on earth does with its final breath. He hands the decision back. That ending, and what the world then did with this book, is our last chapter. One verse more before we leave the teaching chapters, because Indians across 2 millennia have treated it as the Gita's beating heart, and it belongs beside the vision, not after it. Chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. You heard them in our first chapter as doctrine. Hear them now as promise. Whenever Dharma withers and its opposite stands up, I send myself forth, to protect the good, to end the wicked, to re-establish the right order. I take birth age after age. Yada yada hi dharmasya. Even the Sanskrit opening is a household phrase across India. Sung, quoted in speeches, painted on trucks. Read against chapter 11, it gains its edge. The same being who is time with furnace mouths, eating armies, is the one who promises to keep showing up on the side of the good. The two claims are one claim, that the universe grinds and writes itself through the same machinery, and that the grinding is not indifferent. And read against Arjuna's despair, it lands as the poem's final reassurance about action itself. You are not holding up the moral sky alone. Act, contribute your strand. The weave is being tended by more than you. Whether a listener takes that as literal theology, as poetry, or as a way of naming the strange resilience of good causes, the verse has functioned for centuries as fuel. It's the line freedom fighters quoted in prison cells, the line grandmothers give to children leaving home. The Gita's God, summed in it, is neither the distant watchmaker nor the wrathful judge, but something like a returning worker, one who keeps arriving, age after age, wherever the fabric tears. Hold that image of arrival. Because the book itself was about to do exactly that. Arrive, again and again, in century after century, country after country, in the hands of the least likely readers imaginable. Chapter 5. The teaching is complete. Now the ending, which may be the most remarkable thing in the book. Chapter 18, verse 63. Krishna has spoken for 17 chapters. Metaphysics, method, love, the vision that melted a warrior's certainty. And then, thus has this wisdom, secret of secrets, been declared to you by me. Reflect on it fully, and then do as you choose. Yathichasi tatha kuru. As you will, so act. No command, no threat. The most powerful being in the poem's universe, having made his case, returns the decision to a human being, whole. Scriptures do not generally end this way. They end in commandments, covenants, warnings. The Gita ends in a handover. The teacher's confidence that a mind fully informed will choose well, and the theological claim, hiding in plain sight, that God wants a chooser, not a puppet. Arjuna's answer, verse 73, is 4 short claims. My delusion is destroyed, memory is regained, that word deliberately echoing the chain of chapter 2, where lost memory was the last link before ruin, now reforged. I stand firm, doubt's gone, I will do your word. He stands up, he picks up Gandiva, the bow that slipped from his hand in chapter 1. And the poem, having made its point, hands the epic back. The war happens, 18 days, and the Mahabharata spares no one. Bhishma falls to Arjuna's arrows, behind a human shield. Drona is killed after a half-true sentence breaks his will. Victories arrive tasting like ash, and the epic spends entire books on the widow's grief. The Gita never promised the war would feel good. It promised Arjuna could act with a whole mind, and the epic shows exactly what that cost. Within India, the conversation then began its second life. By the 8th century, the philosopher Shankara chose it as one of the 3 texts every school must interpret. Around 1290, the young poet Dnyaneshwar rendered it in Marathi so ordinary people could hear it without Sanskrit. Ramanuja built the theology of love on it. No Indian philosopher after could simply skip it. Then in 1785, it left home. It left home on East India Company paper. Charles Wilkins, a company printer stationed in Bengal, who had learned Sanskrit, rare then for a European, translated the Gita directly into English in 1785, the first Sanskrit book ever printed in English translation. The project had an unlikely patron. Warren Hastings, the company's governor-general, wrote the preface, and one sentence of it has outlived his whole scandal-ridden career. These writings, he predicted, will survive when the British dominion in India shall have long ceased to exist. A colonial administrator, in the act of colonizing, wrote the empire's own expiry notice into the front of the book. The little volume crossed oceans. In New England it reached the transcendentalists. Emerson filled his journals with it and pronounced it the first of books, the voice of an old intelligence. Henry David Thoreau carried a copy to his cabin at Walden Pond and wrote of bathing his intellect each morning in its stupendous philosophy, beside which, he said, the modern world seemed puny. In 1885, exactly a century after Wilkins, the poet Edwin Arnold recast it in English verse as the Song Celestial. And that translation found the single most consequential reader in the book's history, by accident. London, 1888 or 9. A shy, homesick 20-year-old Indian law student is invited by 2 English theosophists to read the Song Celestial with them. He is embarrassed to admit he has never read the Gita, not in English, not in his native Gujarati, not at all. His name was Mohandas Gandhi. He read it in English in London with Englishmen, and later wrote that the poem became his spiritual reference book, the mother he turned to in every difficulty. When he faced empire, he would face it with, of all things, a war poem in his pocket. Which raises the obvious problem, and history staged it as a debate between 2 prisoners. How does a poem whose plot is get up and fight your cousins become the handbook of the century's greatest non-violent movement? Gandhi's answer: allegory. Kurukshetra, he argued, is the human heart. The Kauravas and Pandavas are our lower and higher impulses. The field of Dharma is every day of an ordinary life, and the fight commanded is against one's own weakness. He noted that the epic itself ends in mourning, not triumph, hardly a recruitment poster, and he anchored his reading in the verses on acting without fruit. His campaigns, fasts, and prison terms were karma yoga, effort with the outcome surrendered. But another giant of the independence struggle had already read it the other way. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lokmanya, honored by the people, sentenced to 6 years in Mandalay prison for sedition, spent 1910 and 11 writing Gita Rahasya, a 900-page argument that the Gita's core is energetic action in the world, and that a people facing injustice are commanded by it to resist, by force if necessary. Same 700 verses. One man read soul force, the other read struggle. Both went to prison on their readings, and both prisons fed one freedom movement. The book's strangest 20th century appearance came 4 years after Gandhi began his final campaigns. Robert Oppenheimer had learned Sanskrit at Berkeley in the 1930s with the scholar Arthur Ryder, reading the Gita in the original. He named it among the books that most shaped him. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 in the morning, he watched the first atomic bomb ignite the New Mexico desert. And the verse that rose in him, he said in a famous later interview, was chapter 11:32, in his own stark rendering. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. The physicist reached past comfort and quoted the furnace mouths, the vision's terror, arriving on schedule in the 1 century that could match it. So, back, one last time, to the man sitting down in his chariot with his bow on the floor. You can now read the whole arc in one breath. A person collapses because every choice looks wrong, and the outcomes are unbearable to own. The answer arrives in layers. You are not the dying part. The witness in you was never in danger. There is no exit from acting. Even refusal is an act. So the choice is only between anxious action and free action. Freedom is a discipline. Aim well, work skillfully, offer the work, and leave the verdict to the committee of causes that was always going to decide it. The mind that can't hold this is trainable. Practice and letting go, no effort ever wasted. Love is the widest door in. The universe is larger than your authorship. Time was always the senior partner. And at the end, the teaching hands you back to yourself. Reflect fully, then do as you choose. Arjuna chose, stood, and picked the bow back up. And the choosing, more than the fighting, is what the book was for. The Gita's afterlife has never slowed. Prabhupada's 1968 edition alone has been distributed in the tens of millions. It's sworn on in courtrooms, recited at funerals, argued over in parliaments and PhD theses, and read at 11 p.m. by people in trouble. Which is, if you think about it, exactly the original setting. One person, mid-crisis, listening. If this book earned its minutes, subscribe. Just Books publishes one complete audiobook like this every week, built straight from the sources. And leave this in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. Of all the answers Krishna gave, the deathless witness, the dropped fruit, the trained mind, the open door of love, the vision of time, which one would have gotten you to stand back up? This was the Bhagavad Gita. Thanks for listening. Now reflect on it fully, and do as you choose.